I'm going to start off by having everybody introduce themselves and tell us what is your favorite system you're currently using, or maybe the system you'd like to use more. And we'll just go around and start off, and we'll start with the LTU guest of honor. Ravyn, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I'm Ravyn. I don't know if I'll do something awesome, but I'll probably do something chaotic. So, sometimes those are synonymous. But yeah, I'm Ravyn Evermore. I'm a tabletop streamer. I also do, I'm a professional GM. I do voice acting, arts, a whole ton of different things. One of the things I do, as I mentioned, is design tabletop games. So my favorite system to use is the one that I wrote. I use that on 2 of my shows this season. It's going to be on 3 of my shows next season. I really like it because I wrote it specifically to fit the niche that I wanted, which was I want a system that can support stories rather than having stories have to support the system. So that's the one that I most like to use. Aside from that, I also quite enjoy Powered by the Apocalypse systems. They're very different from mine, but they're also very fun.
So Ravyn,
and then I'll throw a link in the chat for where you can find me.
What's the name of yours? You said you had your own, but you didn't give us the name of it.
Oh, sorry. My brain's already a little fried. It's Fundamental RPG. And second edition is available on my coffee shop right now for pre-order.
Okay. So, James, how about you?
So almost everything I run is in my own homebrew system that is not available. Well, it is available free to use, but it's all in Google Docs, and it's terrible. And if I name it, I fear that you will go and find it. So I'm going to name it with the caveat that if you do see this name, you should run and hide. But I enjoy it. The fact of the matter is, it's designed by an engineer for engineers, and there's a lot of spreadsheets you got to use to run the thing. And I don't recommend anyone try.
Wait, you wrote Shadowrun?
No, so I call it Mindweave RPG.
Oh, shots fired.
As far as things that I do want to run in the near future, I played one short campaign of first edition Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm officially OSR now.
Oh, nice.
And so all my posts lately are about how on the blog are about how first edition is amazing and everyone should play it.
Okay, Cavan, how about you?
I'm Cavan Helps. Most relevant to this group, I co-wrote the Guardians of Umbra setting for Savage Worlds. Like the others here, I've dabbled in making my own RPG systems, but nothing noteworthy, and literally nothing you could find online. I really want to avoid sounding basic by saying Dungeons and Dragons, so I'm going to say my favorite RPG system is the new Tales of Xadia. I stayed up till 2 a.m. the other night reading the rule set. It doesn't exist yet. That's how you know I'm lying. But the core mechanic looks lit. It looks really good. So that's my favorite system, not Dungeons and Dragons, which is elegant and well polished.
It sure is.
Okay. So I'll tell a little bit about myself. I've been gaming RPGs since the late 70s. I am one of those people that I played all the editions of Dungeons and Dragons. I have about 300 different RPGs here on my shelves around me. So I play a lot of different things, and currently the main things we've been playing was we're still playing 3.5 edition of D&D when we do that. And we've been doing a lot of Tiny D6 and using that system. So I'm going to throw it out to whoever wants to kind of leave this as an open forum, as you can just jump in whenever you want. And I don't know, and for the audience, I don't know if they mentioned it, but we will take questions. So if you throw those up in the chat, we're going to try to leave some time at the end to answer a couple of questions. So feel free to pop something up there. So one of the things they put into the general description was how the system affects your table dynamics. How does it affect your group? So I'm going to first ask, what do you think is a big factor in a system that first does affect your group?
One of the big things for me.
Darn it.
I got there first. I win. One of the big things for me that I remember as a kid reading my dad's first edition books, which was unfair. My dad was not running first edition. He was making it up as he went along. but he gave us the book so that we knew the sorts of things that he expected us to be doing. And that was really helpful, actually, because when you read the examples in the books and look at the things that the classes can do, it gives you ideas for what you could do in the story. Something's completely free-form, it doesn't plant that seed. But I remember constantly looking for opportunities to climb up chimneys because the ranger tables had an entry for tracking someone who had climbed up a chimney. And so it told me that that was a thing that I could do in the game. And so those examples that are in the system tell you what the system is expecting you to be able to do.
I don't want to cut off Ravyn there.
Sorry.
No, you're
I was like, can I go? Is it okay?
Hey, Ravyn, you're up.
For me, so how system affects table dynamics. I think it depends on what pillar of RPGs the system focuses on. Is a big one. So you've got role play, you've got exploration, and you've got combat. To give some examples, D&D is very combat focused generally. 5th edition, they moved away from that a little bit and got a little bit more role play in there, which is great. But it's still very heavily combat focused. And so your dynamics at your table are going to be a lot of people figuring out, how do I do combat the best? You'll probably run into a lot of power gamers who like to min-max their character because they want to get the best abilities, do the biggest attacks, and do the most damage and things like that, which, if that's the type of game you're going for, that's great. Other systems like Monster of the Week or Powered by the Apocalypse are a lot more narrative and roleplay focused, where the way the system is set up, it rewards creative storytelling more so than stats or specific talents or feats or things like that. The rules are a lot more simplified. So generally, your players are going to be a lot more, I do this thing that I've just pulled out of my head that I think would look really cool, and then I roll the dice and see if I actually succeeded, if I partially succeeded, or if I just flat out failed. And then there's other games that are more exploration based, and those you typically have a pretty well rounded approach. So there's a little bit of RP, there's a little bit of combat, but it's mostly about where can we go, what areas can we explore, how far can we travel, that sort of thing. My system, Fundamental RPG, tries to balance all three. I think it does so pretty well, but I'd say it's definitely a little more roleplay focused. So there's not a lot of things to min-max characters. And in fact, I designed it with that idea in mind to discourage min-maxing, because I wanted all of the characters to feel balanced, and like everybody can contribute to combat without having to sacrifice this cool role play thing that they wanted to do, or this neat skill that fits their backstory. You're not afraid to put points into things that don't really matter as far as combat goes. So those are some examples of how the system and what it's focused on can change what your players are going to do at the table.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Ravyn's saying. Like, I think every game is somewhere on the spectrum between 99% of the time it's combat and like improv troupe, right? And I think not only where you are on that spectrum, because you get some really, really lightweight games, you get some really, really heavyweight games like Shadowrun, which I'm so honored to be here with James. And not only then how heavy the game is, but where that weight is placed. And so you have, I think an interesting example is actually when you look at the sort of this renaissance of RPGs we've been having for the last decade or so. And we've seen ones that are not combat centric, which honestly I had not known was possible until a few years ago. But you see like Fog of Love or Bluebeard's Bride or games where it has nothing to do with fighting. If you're fighting, you're doing something horribly wrong. Everyone is John, you could argue, has combat in it if you're playing it awesomely. But even these games, it's sort of where is the mechanical focus being placed, because players are naturally going to be interested in when they're interacting in a game with the game other than improv. And so like with Fog of Love, you have the Jenga tower. I actually don't know the core mechanic of Bluebeard's Bride. I only know its reputation. But like, oh, it's okay. And so then they're looking for the next dice roll or the next whatever, because that's where their brain is going. Now I'm interacting with the game on its own terms. And so that's why D&D is a combat game, because that's where the dice rolling is mostly taking place. Wow, that was rambly.
You're totally good. I thought you were more concise than I was.
I think you
one last thing. I just remembered something else I was going to say. Unrelated to mechanics, you can also tell, or it can also change the dynamic. If when you're reading through the book, it gives notes to the players or notes to the GMs. It says, little tips from whoever designed it or wrote it, or optional rules. That's another big one that can change dynamics, because then you get players talking to the GM going, hey, can we try this optional rule? Or, they get a little bit more involved in the pre-game setup.
Okay, so Cavan, you mentioned something that people start to play to the game. They play to what the mechanic they see. So for all of you, when you're running a game, how as a GM do you get the players involved in the culture that you're trying to develop with the system you're using? What are maybe some specific things that you kind of throw out there to them?
The power of session 0, of course, is very, very strong. I think if you're not doing session 0, you're depriving yourself of one of the most powerful tools a GM has. That's where you can literally say to the players, this is what the game expects of us. This is the tone we're going for. This is the kind of story we're telling. And then similarly, when you reward behaviors, you will see more of that behavior. And when you punish behaviors, you will see less of that behavior. That can be used psychotically, but that's also just a fact of how people's brains work.
It's also something that's hard to keep in mind sometimes. If you're kind of a people pleaser, like I am, I'll reward bad behavior because I just don't want them to feel bad about what they did. But they should.
So not really sure necessarily specific to a system, but one thing I do as a GM, I will typically, when I tell people what their surroundings are, or what they see when they succeed on a sight check or perception check or whatever you want to call it, generally I will give, I'll say, this is what you see. Do you want to do 1? Do you want to do 2? Or do you want to do 3? So I give 2 options usually. That are kind of the most obvious things, just in case my description didn't make that clear. And then option 3 is whatever else you can think of. And so it does kind of guide a little bit. It lets the players know, here's what I've described, here's what I expect you to do, or a couple of things that I would expect you to do in this situation. So I can kind of gently guide the game in that direction. But there's also that third option of, but you're also more than welcome to do something completely different if you want. And usually that option 3 is the more chaotic option. And it will get them into trouble. And a lot of my players know, like, that's going to get me into trouble, but I also don't care because that's part of the fun. And they know what consequences that are going to come with that and accept them and go into it anyways. So, but I think giving a couple of options while still leaving a third option open, especially for newer players, will help them kind of go in a direction that's going to be conducive to telling a story, even if it's not what you expected.
I think that's an interesting issue that we've raised here, is that in your tabletop RPG, the DM is going to have as much to do with the table dynamics as the system is going to have, right? You could be playing the crunchiest, GURPS or Exalted or whatever you want, but if the DM has set this up so that there is no combat and you're just talking to people, then most of those rules fall away. They're not part of what you're doing, and so in that case, the DM has completely altered the dynamics of the table from what you would expect for that system.
On that note, there was actually, I swear I'm not doing a bit about Shadowrun. This is an actual story about Shadowrun. I was having a friend show it to me, and it was clear about halfway through the session that he did not know the rules to Shadowrun, the guy who was GMing the game. But what I appreciate eternally about this guy is he went for it anyway. And so he had us roll dice. The outcomes of our dice rolls seemed completely random to me. And the way the world interacted with us seemed really completely ununderstandable, like not possible to understand. And the result was it actually became an unintentional horror game because I had no idea what my actions were going to result in because the game system was being engaged in such an erratic way. And this is not a good idea. I do not endorse doing this, but it was interesting because quite literally he changed Shadowrun into a horror game by not understanding it and conveying his misunderstanding onto the players. And so I would argue the DM has way more power than the system in terms of setting the table's culture.
Yeah. As a counterexample to you said it's not a bad idea. I'd say it's a good idea to maybe not know the rules. Because, well, I won't say it's a good idea. I won't go so far. I'll say I've had good experiences with it because that's what my dad did, right? He didn't want to read the books. He didn't bother to read the books. And he just made it up as he went with his understanding of how math works or of probabilities. And
that's fair. That's a good point.
And carried it on. And then one of the other really good experiences I had was my wife ran a game for my birthday. And this is the first time that she was ever GMing. And so she didn't want to learn a system. So she said, okay, there's D10s. You roll D10s and I decide what happens. And that was the whole mechanics of the system. And we had a blast, right? And part of that was the setting. She said it in our high school that we'd all gone to. And we were fighting demons in the high school and it was fun. But ultimately it was mostly GM dictate, and luckily she was a benevolent tyrant.
That is a good point, though, about the GM being able to kind of set the tone for sure. I'm running a Star Wars game on Thursday nights right now called Elite Bebeskar, which is Mandoa for Clan of Steel.
Oh, wow.
And I'm running it out in the old Star Wars Saga edition because that's the very first system I ever played in. And I went back in. I've got some people that are relatively new to TTRPG in my cast. And they were like, I don't understand how to do this. And I started reading through everything. I'm like, oh, I do not remember this being so crunchy. So it was like, a frantic farmer pulling weeds out of a flower garden. I was just like, all right, we're getting rid of this. We're getting rid of this. We're getting rid of this. We're getting rid of that. Those prerequisites, don't worry about that. We're just going to chuck it. And I've made a very RP focused campaign out of something that's very combat focused. So it's definitely possible, but that's a conscious decision by the GM for sure.
And it's hard to go the other direction, right? Because then you have to write whole rule systems for how the combat works. But it's also part of why I like running my homebrew is because if something comes up that the rules don't exist for, I make it up and nobody challenges it because
you're the highest authority there is.
He's the only one who knows the rules.
Yeah.
I think Paranoia does a good job of that too, where the mechanics Paranoia uses, I almost feel like it's designed to be modular. And Paranoia, one of the things is demonstrating knowledge of the rules of the game is treason. And so if a player demonstrates they know how to play the game, they're summarily executed. And Paranoia, especially when you play that to its most reasonable extreme, I do think there's a lot to be said for if you're doing a long campaign, the players need to know what to expect when they come to the table. But for one-offs, honestly, most of the rules that apply to TTRPG tables can be thrown out. And Paranoia is a great example of the whole time you're confused, it's hilarious, you're dying a lot. And yeah, I think it's a question of sustainability, but definitely for, shorter term things. And also I don't want to minimize your dad, giving his best effort at making the rules work. Because look, if your players are having fun, you're at least doing something right. It's possible you could improve, but right now you're doing well. So
kind of let's flip that over then, because everybody's kind of saying, okay, there's so much that the GM brings to the table, even if you're running Alpha Complex. So on that, what does the system bring to the table then?
The system hopefully brings better ideas than you're going to make up on the fly for how to resolve certain situations. Mm-hmm. And sometimes this goes badly, right? Sometimes it's too bulky and you'd be better off hand waving, that mass combat where you've got hundreds of orcs fighting hundreds of elves and you decided to roll every die. Is there a good mass combat system for 5e that anyone's using, by the way? I have a great one for 1E. Anyway, and
Math
so
combat, did you say?
yeah,
There used to be one for first
No,
edition.
no.
yeah. First edition's got a few versions that I like, but anyway, that's immaterial to the point. The point is, if you're making that up on the fly because you don't have it in 5th edition, and you decide that you're going to roll a d20 for every single one of those orcs and every single one of those elves, that's a bad decision, right?
Right.
And so hopefully, when those decisions come up, if the rules are doing something to support the decisions they expect to come up often, that are better than what you'd come up with on the fly.
I'd say what the system brings to the table is the toolkit for the GM to use. And if your toolkit only has, a giant machete, then you're going to be playing a lot of hacking and slashing style stuff. But if your toolkit comes with a lot of, crafting tools and a plethora of screwdrivers and, a miter saw and a workbench and all this other stuff, then you're going to be spending a lot of time going, which one of these tools did I want to use again? So
do I use the tool builder over here to build new tools?
Yeah. So I think what, if you're a designer of systems, what you're wanting to shoot for is, how do I get the tools that the GM will need to use with the most variety without overwhelming them? And that's what I look for as a GM. It's one of the things I actively thought about in designing Fundamental RPG is I looked at D&D and I was just like, that's a whole lot of rules. If you're a new GM, it can be a little overwhelming, even with all the resources out there. So I was like, how can I give them the tools to make it feel like a game? So, you've still got skill points, you've got attributes, you've got combat mechanics and things like that. But set it up to where they can just grab it, tell whatever story they want. And if they're brand new to the game, it takes maybe an hour to set the whole thing up and run a, very long campaign. So to summarize all of that, the system brings the toolkit, and then it's up to the GM to build something with it.
And with the more used systems, I'd like to extend the analogy. Those tools are well tested.
Yes.
Right. So I proved that you can make up a massive toolkit with my extensive game that I wrote in college. It was not tested in any way, right? And having played it now for years and years, I'm thinking of writing a 2nd edition for it, which is intimidating because it's so big. And the tools that I made were terrible tools, right? And so when you pick up a system, that system is purporting to do something really well, and you're hoping that those tools have been tested well enough that they're going to do better than what you make up on your own.
Yeah, and I think boiled down to its most elemental level, having fun at an RPG, it means having your expectations met in a way that is pleasing. I guess you could define any activity that way. And systems give you a common language through which the game master and players can talk to each other, and frankly, the game master and players and game can talk to each other. Because I think one thing that I think is really underappreciated about RPGs and why they are better than improv comedy is because you have two things that improv comedy doesn't. You have a player, the GM, who's allowed to say no, and should use that power judiciously, but to enhance the collective experience. And then you also have an improviser that can say no and doesn't care how you feel, and that's the dice. And the system tells you what that improviser is allowed to do. And obviously the GM can overrule anything that happens at the table, but generally when I'm talking to new GMs, I think people fudge way too much. I think the GM should deny the dice only if they absolutely have to, because the dice are such an important, or the Jenga Tower or whatever, but they're such an important improviser on the team because they can say no and they don't care how you feel about it. And I think that's really, really powerful.
And it really depends. I think when you're story heavy, you can ignore the dice more often to make the story better when you believe that you can make that judgment call. But if your players are expecting a tactical game where their decisions really matter and where they have to deal with the randomness of the dice, then it's robbing them of that experience to fudge the dice just because it was going to go badly for them, or even if you wanted to go worse for them to fudge the dice. I can't decide which is worse.
If you fudge against your players, please take up war games. Stop GMing.
Yeah. I would agree. I do fudge a little bit more than probably your average GM, simply because most of my games are entertainment for an audience. So if the dice are preventing us from doing something cool and entertaining, I'm going to be a little bit nicer on the players if they're doing something really cool, because I'm like, I want to see this happen. This is really cool. The audience is going to enjoy this. But generally, we have things in place to kind of take care of that anyways. We have donation rewards and things like that for bonuses and buffs for the characters. But generally, if I'm going to like legitimately fudge a roll or say, we're not going to count that result. It's if a character or a player rather did something absolutely normal and expected and logical, and the dice are like, you die now.
That's when you realize, why did I even have them roll? Why did I have them roll to climb the rope? I knew they'd climb the rope successfully.
Yeah, I have no problem with them getting seriously hurt from dice rolls. But generally, if you're at my table, your character's not going to die unless you do something, just really unintelligent. But other things can happen that are really bad. But I will fudge dice rolls when it's just you got really unlucky and rolled 3 1s in a row. I'm not going to kill off your character because random chance.
Well, and Ravyn brings up a really good point too, that streaming tabletop RPGs has become such a huge thing that I think your behavior when you're streaming versus at your home table are quite likely to be very different. Because at the home table, you're there to mutually entertain each other. And on the stream, that's great. You probably should be entertaining each other, but you're really there for the audience. And so that's where you need someone who can make quick, sharp decisions about, nope, the dice are wrong on this one. I totally agree.
There's a danger associated with that there's a lot of people coming to the RPG community now through streams and podcasts who that's what they see. And so they try to treat their table like they're entertaining other people when they're not. And they don't have the cultural side of having just a fun table.
Streams don't entertain other people either, so.
That's why.
I was going to say, I think you got a good point there, but I think it also applies if anybody has done like convention games. If you've ran those or played in them, they have a very different cultural feel because you usually are sitting down playing with a bunch of people that you really don't know.
Yeah,
so it's kind of it's an interesting aspect. So next one I'm going to move on to, since we've kind of touched about it, is I guess what we're saying is what the system provides is like a scaffold to build on, or a general area that you can talk through so that you're all talking the same language for the game. So in your experiences in the different games you played, what are some of the more unique mechanics that you've come across that you think are very fitting for a game that people might want to consider that they don't normally see? I think Cavan's got something.
I do, but I feel like I've been a hog, so I'm happy to jump in the back of the line.
I don't feel like you've been a hog.
Okay, well then I'm going to hog. The main problem I'm having here is picking my favorite one, but I'm going to go with one that came immediately to my head. There is a game that is wonderful and beautiful, and it has major problems. It's called Dogs in the Vineyard, and the writer, I'm spacing her name right now, but she looked at frontier Utah, and so you've got the Mormons coming in and colonizing Utah. She took that culture and basically said every folklore, everything frontier Mormons believed when colonizing Utah is 100% correct and literal. And so essentially you play a home teacher, which is someone who goes and preaches the word to the members of your congregation. And you are basically purging them of demons. And so you are a home teacher inquisitor in frontier Utah. I absolutely love this game. It's dumb in a number of ways, but it's a really, really fun game. And what they do is she has you roll a big pool of dice, and then based on various things that form your pool, and then you have like a confrontation with someone. And so I've got my pool of dice here, and you've got your pool of dice there. And the example she gives is you're basically interrogating a member of your church. And so you say, okay, I saw you with Goody Proctor or whatever, and then you pick out a number of dice for the strength of that accusation, and then they like have to match the strength of your accusation out of their own dice pool until one of your dice pools gets runs out. Those of you who are good at math already see there is a major problem with this system, but it is so fun. It is so fun to role play with. And yeah, no, it's that's the mechanic that first came to my head. There's a million others, but I will stop talking.
I have two really good ones that come to mind. One of those is called Capers, and it doesn't use dice; it uses a deck of cards. And so you have a deck of cards that you deal from for your results. And you get more chances to flip another card based on how many levels you have in the skill. And it's interesting, partly because all of their settings are settings where it makes sense for you to be playing poker or something at in game, right? Like they've got a spies one. They've got the original Capers was bootleggers versus GIs, right? Or what are they called? G-men. And so with superpowers. Sorry, I forgot to mention there's superpowers involved in all of this. Yeah.
Nice.
And so it's an interesting mechanic because as a player, you can count your cards, right? You can know, I'm about to try something really hard and I've already drawn all my kings. I don't know.
Oh, that's cool.
If I should flip again when I've already got a 10 out, right? And then the other one that comes to mind is Planet Mercenary by Howard Taylor right here in Utah. They've got they call it D6 cubed because you're not just rolling 3D6, which already has the nice normal bell curve that I like, but it's got when you roll triples, your gun might break if you're using a certain type of gun and things like that. Mm. And also Planet Mercenaries fire team mechanic, where if you're going to die, you can have one of your fire team members take the shot for you. And then there's a 50-50 chance they die and a 50-50 chance that they essentially level up so that when you do eventually die, you can play that character and they'll come in at a higher level. And so it's a very death-centric mechanic that makes it feel good to have bad things happen to you.
I've got a couple as well. And again, I feel biased using this as an example, but it's a mechanic that I do really enjoy. So in fundamental RPG, I'm sounding like a broken record, but one of the things that you do in character creation and as you level up is you choose assets and challenges. And it's a way to not only, it works almost like a feat or a talent in other systems, but instead of it being, I chose this so I can do this thing, they're designed to round out your character. So you could choose something like trained, so you get more stamina points, so you can do more cool stuff with magic if you're using magic in your game, or you can get extra actions during a turn, things like that. But it's balanced. So at the beginning, you have to choose 2 assets and 2 challenges, and challenges can be something like you're just known for being really unlucky, and so the GM 2 times per session can make you roll with disadvantage, essentially. Or maybe you're a compulsive truth teller or compulsive liar, and that's just part of your character, and you either play to that or you don't. But if you don't play to that, then you lose out on chances for experience, because it's designed to give you more experience the more you play to your challenges and your assets. So that's one
easy
thing.
XP for me. All my characters are compulsive liars.
But the idea is to reward thoughtful role play, and encourage things that way, and also help you figure out, like, okay, I want these assets and these challenges. What kind of character would fit, that? What happened to the character to make them have this or struggle with this thing? Another one is Monster of the Week or Powered by the Apocalypse, having the idea of a mixed success. Is a mechanic that I really enjoy, where it's like you succeed, kinda, but this other bad thing also happens. And then finally, Zweihander is another system that I really enjoy, that has exploding dice. So If you're rolling a damage die, if you're rolling a d6 and it hits 6, then you roll another d6. And so if you get a lot of 6s in a row, you can end up with this massive amount of damage. But you just never know if it's going to be 1d6 or is it going to be 3d6, or, if things go wild, do you get up to 10,
Yeah.
I've seen exploding dice in dice rollers and enjoyed them just rolling them with no purpose in mind. I had no idea what game they were from.
I was going to say the stacking of 6s is something that comes from the first edition of Shadowrun also.
Oh, yeah.
Happening.
Well, Savage Worlds does the same thing, and in Savage Worlds you have 3 hit points. So it's shockingly easy to go from, oh, this is fine, to this guy gets a lucky jab and you're dead. And it's awesome.
Some other ones that kind of feel like you were saying, just that I've played over the years. Aces and Eights uses a playing deck, and that's an Old West setting, mythological Old West in a lot of ways, and you can tie it in. But they use a deck of cards and some of their things. We've talked about the ones using the Jenga towers, so that's something else people might want to consider. Basically anything out there. I've also played one that uses tarot cards as a way that would help tell the story to fill in gaps. It was a game out of the UK called Wheel of Fortune. And then one that I want to throw out there that I came across and was kind of fun, it's called A Single Moment. It's a 2-player RPG game. And you can play it in different things, but it's designed like the old samurai movies, where 2 samurais have stepped up to each other, and they're getting ready to have their one-on-one combat. And it goes through them back chapters as the people tell their story of why they got to this point. And as they do that, they get awarded a dice pool based on how well they tell the earlier chapters by their opponent. And then you have a dice pool to do your final combat against each other.
That's cool. Yeah, I've heard of that one. It's a really cool concept.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was really, you have to have a creative mind though to go, why am I here? So we're now getting to the point that we're going to open it up to questions. So if we have any, we'll turn it over to our producer out there and see if we have any questions in the chat.
Let's see. Unconquered One asks, besides preparation, what tools do you use to minimize the tedium and maximize the experience?
So my RPG running revolutionized when I realized that everything in an RPG is an abstraction. And so because I was raised on a diet of nothing but D&D for my first 10 years of playing, I sort of had this mentality that every swing of the sword needs to be accompanied by a D20 roll. It does not. And so people complain about the rogue going off on his side adventure or whatever. When my rogue, because that's, rogue's got a rogue. And so when the rogue goes off on his side adventure, I say, roll me stealth and roll me sleight of hand or whatever's appropriate to the situation. And then from that, we can know how well your little caper went. And so we've spent 30 seconds on your character. You got to do your thing, and we're back to the group. Similarly,
here's your stealth roll for the whole day to see if you made it today. Now roll another one for tomorrow. Yep.
Well, sure. That one makes me clench up a little, but yes, that is the idea. And similarly, so if something is not going to be interesting mechanically, just get through it. And so you can do all sorts of fun things. Like if the fighter starts a brawl, or the barbarian gets in a brawl with someone at a bar, or there's a crowd forming around the party and they're going to use violence to get out. You don't want to have a combat sequence with 25 unarmed peasants. Just have them roll a combat roll, and that's generally how well they did in the combat. You know they're going to win. It's a question of how well are they going to win. And so if something's not going to be interesting, compress it into 1, maybe 2 die rolls is what I would recommend.
Yeah, I would also say the same thing. Also, if your players pick a fight with somebody that you don't have stat blocks for, gauge like they're at the average of the party. So like I know a D20 plus 10 is like the average that the party is going to get on their attacks or something like that, whatever the case may be. And that's the enemy stats. With my system, because it goes from level 1 to 30, and generally the totals for DCs and things like that are a little bit bigger than D&D. I can get away with just rolling 2d20 because I know it could be a 2 or it could be a 40. But generally that's the odds are it's going to be within a reasonable amount for the party, and if it gets above that, then they just got really lucky. But that way, I'm not going, well, hold on, let me rifle through some sheets here and figure out what this character's defense is, and you can easily just streamline that by doing little tricks like that. Things I picked up very quickly when I had to stream games, because I'm like, well, I don't have time to go look up this character stats. What do I do? So that's one thing. And another thing to maximize experience is give your players freedom. Don't try to micromanage your game. A lot of the time, if you just throw out a prompt and say, how does your character feel about that? What do you want to do about it? Or how do you want to approach this? And then just let them go. A lot of the times they will do a lot of the work for you, for one thing, just because they're playing the game. It takes a lot of the load off of the GM that way. But also they're having a blast because they're telling the story, which is ultimately what you want to do, is have it be a group enjoyment, not just you telling them what the story is and then letting them react to it. And that's for any system you can do that with, really. So yeah, trusting your players and giving them the freedom to narrate a bit was something I learned from playing Monster of the Week a lot. Have the players say, instead of having them say, can I do this? It's tell me what you want to do, and then I'll tell you if you succeeded or not based on what you rolled.
And that's a big difference. Yeah.
Yep. And the only thing I'm going to add is a way that I minimize tedium for myself is to have random tables. So as the GM, the random tables make it so I don't know what's going to happen, right? And that can create some really fun moments. For example, my players were carrying bags of cement up river to go clog up some pipes that were putting toxins into the river and poisoning their village. And they got attacked by kobolds because I rolled it on my table. And then they got attacked by kobolds again while they were camping that night. And then got attacked by kobolds again. And I thought, well, this is kind of boring. I keep rolling kobolds. But I could see them thinking, why are the kobolds following us? What's going on here? So they tracked them back to their dragon overlord and almost got killed by a dragon at low level. And it was an experience that I didn't see coming. It was an experience that I hadn't planned. We all had a great time, including me. I had a great time because it was not what I happened that day, which was, filling in pipes of cement.
I want to put in a +1 for that too. The reason American politics are in shambles right now is because humans are fantastic at seeing patterns where no patterns exist. And if you roll stuff randomly, your brain will start connecting to them. Your players' brains will connect them. Random tables are magic. They're fantastic.
They are good. One last thing I'll add to that topic too is when you're plotting out your campaign as a GM, try your best to not think linearly. Have story points that you want to hit, events that you want to happen. So I will usually, I do it mostly mentally now just because it's second nature to me. But when I started out, I started writing everything as bullet points or an outline. And I know, I want this event to happen. I want this event to happen. I want this location to happen. And then it was basically up to the players what order that it all happened in, just based off of what they did and where they wanted to go.
Okay. The only thing that I'd kind of sum up with all that is don't sweat the small stuff. If it's something that you're finding tedious, move on. Just stop.
Your players are bored if you are, yeah.
There's no reason to go through and play out all the little things that they buy at the general store. You can just say, okay, give me a list of what you bought and we're done. Boom. I heard from one person that does a lot of authoring too. They said the best way to do it is think about it. If you wouldn't read it in a book, in terms of a book, the novel you're reading, then go ahead and let it fall out of your game, because we're in this aspect of creative storytelling. We're creating the story. So kind of use that as a guide. So real quickly.
Good rule of thumb.
Yep.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say we're coming up on our 5-minute mark. So I was hoping to get into more questions, but I think that one really brought up a bunch of stuff. So now at this point, I'm going to give everybody just a minute or two to kind of tell if you've got anything else going on, where we can find you, and anything of interest, last point that you want to throw into this. We're going to go in reverse order this time. So, Cavan, you're up.
I would love it if you would go buy Guardians of Umbra, the setting I helped Michael Barbeau write for Savage Worlds. In the RPG world, follow me on Facebook. I don't know. I'm not doing anything interesting, but I'm a semi-interesting guy. So that's my shtick. And I have nothing to add. This was a great panel. I love being on panels with Ravyn. That's what I want to add.
Oh, thanks.
It's really true.
Okay, James.
Yeah, so I've got Mindweave RPG, and I linked my blog in there. I've got things on Drive-Thru RPG. The most popular one, Copper bestseller, is the Rotating Labyrinth. I have it right side, doesn't matter. People love this, and I hate it now. I made it, 7-8 years ago. But if you type in Rotating Labyrinth, I'll come up. But if you do go to Drive-Thru RPG, I urge you, it's pay what you want to get the Missing Watchman of Rotstone Light, which I much prefer to the Rotating Labyrinth, and give that a go.
Ravyn.
All right. So I'm Ravyn. I do a whole ton of stuff, most of it tabletop related. Biggest one being streaming. I stream Tuesday through Saturday at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and Friday and Saturday also at noon Mountain Time right now. That's at twitch.tv/RAVVYN. I'm also throwing out my link to pre-order Fundamental RPG 2nd Edition. That's at if you're watching this later on YouTube and don't have access to the Discord that we're on, that's coffee or ko-fi.com/RAVVYN/shop. That'll get you there as well. And that's where the fully released version will be sold as well. And then finally, if you want to find me online, there's a whole lot of different places you can do so. Usually RAVVYN or the RAVVYN. You can also just go to Linktree. That's linktr.ee/the RAVVYN. And that's got my links to everything, including my website. And that's me.
Okay, so I'm just going to sum up for everybody that's listening in of what my takeaways from all this. If you're looking at a system for your RPG game, don't worry so much about the system, except maybe of what the setting might be, and it gives you a common structure and language that you can have with your players. Remember that if you're running the game, it's your game. You can make alterations to the system, and you can bring whatever you want to it. So it's more important of what you do with it instead of what the system does to you. Is a way I kind of seen this. So I'm Dan Yocom. I'm a writer. I have some short stories out. You can find me at my author page, which ties into several things, because I also write reviews for RPGs, tabletop games like all these here, books and movies, and that's at guildmastergaming.com. I also write for Tabletops and Tentacles, and I also write for Tabletop United. So, hey, thanks for joining us, and hopefully you have some fun games.